Well, good morning, everybody. Today's topic is dissecting the sell. My name is Jimmy Hernandez with Senior Solutions. I am the agency director. And so we're going to go in and talk about how to dissect the sell. We're going to show you, or I'm going to train you on how to have a very high closing rate. So please get your pen and paper out, and we're going to get this party started. So I'm going to get really surgical with this and take you step by step and show you how to say it and what to say. So let's get started. The first part is building rapport. So once you get into the home, whether you door knocked it or you set an appointment ahead of time, once you're walking in, you really want to go ahead and start building rapport. And so my tips here is I personally look for commonality with my prospect. I'm looking for something to connect with. So just to give you some ideas, I do a lot of gardening. I really enjoy it, and I know a lot about plants and I know the name of plants, right? So I can compliment people on their different type of plants that they have, and I'll name them, and then it's an instant connect because they know what they have, and when I identify it, they're like, wow, right? So that's something I try to connect with. If I don't see anything there, then I look for collections, right? Like, what do they collect? Are they do they have a collection of owls or elephants, or maybe it's a Betty Boop collection, or maybe they're collecting roosters or whatever they have. I look for something to have a conversation about. uh, Maybe it's about their decorating. Maybe, you don't see a collection, but they have a really good, decorating style. Compliment them on that. It could be their furnishings. It could be that their house is really clean. I mean, oh my God, anybody that has a really clean house, that takes work, right? So compliment them on that and they'll appreciate it. So I look for something to sincerely compliment people on and have a little conversation. And then I listen to them intently. So you don't want to get caught up on talking too much about yourself. I do believe that it's important to drop in little tidbits about my family and about myself, because people want to know about you. They want to know who they're dealing with, but you don't want to get caught up just rambling on about yourself. They don't want to know all the details. They don't need to know all the drama and all that stuff. Just little bits of information go a long way. So again, listen intently. A couple of things real quick. I'm just going to talk about some, I guess you can say psychological or psychology behind the sale. You got to know who you're dealing with, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is you have the older folks are typically going to be right now about 74, 75 years and older. Those folks are part of the silent generation, right? So the main thing about the silent generation is they really want to know about you. So if you get that older client that's 75 and older, you do want to make sure that you're dropping little bits of information about yourself. You'll probably be surprised that they're going to engage in you and they might ask or dig a little bit more, and it's okay. Just don't go rambling off talking about yourself a lot, but they want to get to know you. So that's important, right? The biggest group or age group that we work with are baby boomers, obviously, right? And so the biggest thing about baby boomers is that they connect with people over food, right? So this is why a lot of times they're offering you something to drink, maybe a cup of coffee, maybe a soda, water, maybe they're offering you cookies or some food. Always accept it. That's how they connect with you. So you just need to understand that, okay? Um, and then the last generation is my generation. We were the generation that was raised by baby boomers, right? So like the baby boomers, they were back in the 60s and 70s. They were protesting, they were questioning everybody. And so they taught us, right? That generation taught us always to question and look to see what's behind the curtain. What is that person's motive? And it makes me laugh when I studied this, because that's exactly how I am. I'm very skeptical. I'm always looking as to why somebody's telling me something. And it's just part of my my makeup because that's the way our generation was raised, right? So you just need to make sure that you're covering all your bases with these people. Now that's a generational difference. And then you can go into personalities. I'm not going to break all that down, but I will tell you this, you know, the main one is people that are very matter of factly, they're analytical, they want you to get straight to the point. You need not to ramble on. A lot of people ramble on because they think, oh man, I'm losing this. I need to keep talking, and you're just going to make the situation worse. Just be very, as matter of factly, back with those folks and get straight to the point. They're going to appreciate it. They're more likely to do business with you if you handle it that way. And then the other end of the spectrum is that super friendly person that's just super outgoing, very social. They want to talk, 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 talk. And you want to let them do that, and you want to talk a little bit about yourself. But in the end, you want to grab those people and bring them back in. So the time I give myself to talk with people is usually 5 to 10 minutes, right? After 5 or 10 minutes, then you're just really hurting yourself. You don't want to ramble on more than that. So you want to bring them back in, right? So how do you do that? So typically what I do is when I walk into the house after I started, looking for something to connect with them, we're complimenting, we're having a little chit chat. Obviously, you want to try to get to the kitchen table if possible, right? If that looks good, some scenarios that's not going to work. Then you want to get to, a comfortable seating, maybe a sofa, maybe they have some chairs. I mean, guys, I've seen it all. I've done appointments standing up. I've done appointments outside in the hot sun, writing an app on my trunk, right? So like, I mean, I've been everywhere. I've sat on the front steps of a porch. I mean, you just want to kind of pick what's the best scenario for you in that particular situation. But whatever that seating arrangement is, I always sit next to my clients, not across from them. Okay. So that's really, really important. You want to connect with them. You want to be able to draw them into your conversation. As you can see, this picture I have right here, this lady is sitting next to the couple. She's not sitting across from them. And that's how you want to do it. If you're at a table, same thing. Let me just look at my notes here. You want to learn about them. You want to try to find out about, their family, and you want to, see, who it is that they're trying to protect. Why did they fill that card out, right? And you want to try to get that in small talk if possible. But when it's time to get to business, then this is the phrase that I usually start with. I say, well, Joe, I've been doing this a while, and most people tell me the reason why they sent this card in, right? So that's how I bring them back in 10 to 15 minutes. I start with that sentence, and what happens, it tells them, okay, we're getting down to business. Let's talk business. So I start with that question. I say, most people tell me the reason why they send the card in is simply they don't want to leave the family with any financial burdens when they pass on. And then I ask, is that why you sent in the card? And I give them a slight nod, and they usually will say yes, right? You got to wait for the answer. Sometimes I get some odd answers, right? But wait for the answer, let them answer you, and then great. And then I go on and I talk about the three situations, and I'll go on to say, most people, they usually fit into one of three scenarios. In fact, the majority of the people I talk to, they don't currently have anything in place to take care of their final arrangements. And I normally don't even have to ask, is that you? Because if they identify with that, they normally will go ahead and say, that's me, right? If that's the case, then you don't need to ask or give the other two situations. Just make a note that they don't have any coverage. Okay, we're going to go with this answer. So if they say, I don't have anything in place, then the next question I ask is, so let me ask you, if you were to pass away unexpectedly, who is going to be the person responsible for making those final arrangements for you? And then listen, right? That's normally who they want to protect. They're going to tell you it could be my daughter, it could be my son, my brother, my sister, my cousin. Like, I've heard all kinds of stuff. It could be my best friend. So whoever they tell you, then the next question is, well, how would this affect them financially if you did die unexpectedly and you didn't have anything in place, and let them answer, right? So what's happening here is you're collecting the information, you're getting them thinking about this on the emotional side, right? And then if need be, you can refer back to this when you're trying to close the sale, right? So you're finding out who they're trying to protect, how's it going to affect them, right? Let's go on to scenario number 2. If they don't jump on the first one, then I'll say the second, the second scenario is some people, they have something in place to take care of their final expenses, but maybe they feel it's just not enough and they want to get some additional coverage. Again, if that fits them, they'll say, that's me, right? And if that's me, then I'll say, well, what do you have in place, right? Maybe they have a prepaid, maybe they have a life insurance policy. How much coverage is it? Make that note, right? Move on. If they don't say that, then I give the last scenario. And then lastly, Mr. Customer, some people, they have everything taken care of, for their final arrangements, but they mailed in the card simply because they want to leave a legacy gift, either to a family member or close friend, or maybe to their favorite church or charity. And if they don't say anything, then I ask, so can you tell me, which one of these situations best describes you? And then let them describe themselves, right? And then you go with that, right? So you want to, again, identify who it is that they're trying to protect. You want to look for what is their motivation, why are they interested in getting a life insurance policy, right? So then the next step, once you find that out, is you're going to go into the pre-sale folder. So this is where I start. If you're not using the pre-sale folder, you're really, I guess you can say, lowering your closing ratio. I got to tell you, when I first started, we didn't have this. We just used blank folders. I would go buy white or blue or, just a solid color folder, and I did my pre-sale package. When Joe came out with these, I think it was like 2 years later, man, my closing ratio just shot up. I was like, wow, Joe, I picked up at least 10%, probably more like 15%. And I contributed to credibility. When people see this, they know that you're legitimate. They see nice color. They know this was done ahead of time. They know that you're not just some fly-by-night guy, right? So I pull this out, and then I simply say, I want to tell you a little bit about us before we get started. And they'll say yes. And I'll say, no, listen, these are our companies that we work with. Transamerica, Mutual of Omaha, I usually say Gerber and AIG. Those are normally the most recognizable names, right? And then I'll say my job is simply to get you the best coverage and then get you the best price. And what I want you to understand, Mr. Customer, is I'm not married to any of these companies, and I cheat on all of them. And I usually get a laugh out of that, and then we move on, right? So the next thing we do is I ask this question. So I open up the folder and I'll ask, have you given thought as to whether you prefer a burial or a cremation? If they say a burial, then I pull out that, that sheet out of the folder. If they say cremation, I pull out the cremation sheet. If they're not sure, I pull out both, right? So let's just assume that, let's just go with the funeral, traditional funeral. I'll just let them know that I am not, employed by a funeral home. This is not my price list. This is the national average, and these prices could vary, in your local, community, also depending on what you select. This just gives us a really good guide by how much coverage we should be applying for. And they always agree, oh, okay, cool, right? Sometimes they want to go, through the, oops, I hit that with my finger. Sometimes they want to go through the numbers and they want to, kind of look it over, and I let them, we have a conversation about it. Sometimes they just want to look at that bottom number, right? So they just look at the 9,600. I'll just say, let's just round that off to 10,000. And then I ask, have you had to plan or been, participated in, making the arrangements for any of your family members? And let them respond. because that's a better number to go with, right? So if they say, yeah, I did my parents, say, oh, well, how long ago was that? Oh, that was 3 years ago. How much did that cost you? Go with that number because it's real to them, right? Sometimes it's more recent, right? So, assuming the 10,000, we'll start with that. And then the next thing, we go on to is the 10 facts brochure, right? So then I pull this out and I'll say, now listen, I want to give this to you. This is some really good reading. This is, the 10 facts that funeral directors don't want you to know. And I want to tell you a little story, Mr. Customer. I have a client, and this is a true story. When I first started, his name is Mr. Palomo. And when I met with him, his wife unfortunately was already on hospice. She was about to pass away. And so I wasn't able to put anything in force for her, but I put a policy in force for himself. Well, sure enough, shortly after we met, she did pass, and he contacted me and he says, Jimmy, I only had $3,000 on a life insurance insurance policy I had gotten like 20 years ago, and I really want to bury her. Can you help me? I remember you telling me about those 10 tips. I said, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Well, Mr. Palomo was a military veteran, so we were able to, go through the VA to take care of the plot and the headstone. All those charges were taken care of by the military. So it really is more like the funeral home, right? So then I looked through it, and the casket was going to cost $3,000. He goes, Jimmy, this is my whole check. And I said, well, Mr. Palomo, I know that one of these facts says that in our state, the funeral home is not allowed to make you buy their casket. In other words, you can buy it from anybody. You don't have to buy it from them. I said, you know what, let me do a little research. So I Googled it, and I found 3 locations in our city in San Antonio that sells caskets to the public. I called all 3. The one that seemed like the best one to go with was actually also closest to him. And the reason why I say that is they had a showroom. And so we called them. I set an appointment. He went out there. His son took him. I did not attend, but his son took him. And he called me back, and he was really appreciative. He said, Mr. Hernandez, I really want to thank you. I told him the funeral home I was working with and the casket we had selected, they had advised us that they're the ones that sell the caskets to that funeral home, and they had the same one here. He showed it to me on the showroom floor. Sure enough, it was the same exact casket. I asked him, well, how much was it? He said it was only $600. Can you imagine? That's a $2,400 savings. Then on top of that, they really liked him. He's a sweet gentleman. He said, you know what? I'm going to also throw in the memorial cards for you, and you don't have to pay for those at the funeral home. That saved him another $200. So think about that. He saved $2,600 by buying the casket directly from those people, right? His son said, you know what, Dad, I'm going to pay for the casket. He charged it. So his father still had the $3,000 to go back in. We renegotiated with the funeral home. They took the $3,000 for the, embalming and all their stuff for the memorial service. And he got it all done for $3,000. The people that I tell this story to, they love this story, right? And so what am I doing? I'm letting them know that I'm a real person, that I have their best interest in mind. And also I'm letting them know, just in case they really want a burial, but maybe they can't afford a policy that's going to be enough to cover a burial. If they go with something less, there's always some alternative solutions that might help them piece that together, right? So that's my little story on that. I don't go through every one. I just pick one out. The next form that's in the pre-sale folder is the Social Security form. I tell them, look, I printed this right off Social Security Administration's website, and this kind of shows us not only what your life expectancy is, but also what they expect the funeral cost to be at that time. Now, this is for a traditional burial with a full memorial service, right? So then I ask them how old they are. So like, let's just assume the person I'm talking to is 62, just as an example, right? 62-year-old male. So look at this, they expect that you're gonna live at least, I always say like that, at least another 18, 19 years. That puts you at 80 or 81. And then some people say, oh my God, I'm gonna live that long, or some people say, oh, that's not long enough. And I'll say, well, do y'all have, does your family have long life? Yeah. Well, how long did your mother live? How long did your father live? Oh, they lived to the 90s. Oh, well, then you'll probably live that long too, right? So I just want to reassure them that they got some time there left, right? But I'm doing this for two reasons. One, in a second, I'm going to tie it into my presentation where we're going through the flip chart. But two, I'm also putting a number, right? So going back to 62-year-old male, at that time for a traditional burial, you're looking about $23,000, right? So that's the future cost, right? So we talked about today's cost is right about 10,000, future cost is 23,000, right? So then the next thing we go on to is the memorial guide, right? So then I pull this booklet out and I'll say, does your family know what your last wishes are? Now, normally if it's husband and wife, they know, they've talked about it, right? But if maybe there's only one person left, maybe the other person's already passed on, maybe they're divorced, maybe they never got married, right? So they need to know what their children need to know, or their family member needs to know what their last wishes are. And a lot of times they don't, because that's not a comfortable conversation to have with your children. You can say, Mr. Customer, this is an easy way for you to document what your last wishes are. And I just simply open up the book, go through I don't go through it page by page, just go through some of the questions. And I say, you can take your time after I leave, fill this out. There's even a section right here in the front where you can sign it, and you leave this for your children, or you leave this for your family, and that way they can honor your wishes. And I just leave it at that. Now, if it's a married couple I'm talking to, I'll say, now look, y'all know each other's wishes right now, but what if one of y'all passes? Then it's really important to have this book in place, because for the second one to pass, the family must understand, what your last wishes are. The other thing this really helps with is that it settles any or squashes any disagreements or arguments among the family members. They're not having to decide whether they're going to cremate you or bury you. They're going to be able to honor your wishes, and they really like that, right? So then we show them that. The next one I show them is the children's whole life. Now, I don't pull this out unless I actually see kids in the house, right? So if I see little kids running around, grandma and grandpa's taking care of them, I pull this out and I just go over it real quick, and I'll say, look, I know I'm here to talk to about, putting something in place for you. I just want to show you this real quick because we have some really good programs, Children's Whole Life with Mutual of Omaha. Here's a real quick, age bracket. Let's just say, they got a kid that's 10 to 14 years old. It's not gender specific, so it goes either way, male or female. Let's say you wanted to put 20,000 in place, that's only $10 a month, right? So that's a nice little add-on sell, and I'm just kind of getting rid of it right up front. Now we're going to get into the flip chart presentation, right? So you guys can see that this is taking some time, right? The bulk of my presentation or my sell is right there. Most of the time is spent in upfront and not so much on the flip chart, right? So just thought I'd tell you that. So let's go ahead and get started with the flip chart presentation. So this is where I ask, so do you know how these state regulated programs work? And they usually will say no. In some cases they say yes, but most of the time they say no. And then, this is where you can do the upfront contract. I summarize and I'll just say, these are the 5 guarantees that you get with this program. And then I'm going to really elaborate on this, and I want y'all to really pay attention, because this is like really where I sell the sizzle. Don't just go over these 5 and don't just read them, right? You need to elaborate on each one. So these are the 5 guarantees you get, Mr. Customer. The first one is that the affordable premiums are guaranteed never to increase. Now, this is regardless of your age or your health. And then I go on to say, and I look when I'm sitting down in the kitchen or in the living room, I always look to see if they have a mailer that came from AARP or Globe Life or Mass Mutual, Colonial Penn, whatever, right? I'm looking to see what they're looking at. And I know almost always, I'm telling you, almost always I find it because I'm looking for it, right? So then I'll tell them to grab it, right? Particularly AARP is usually what I see, right? Also Mutual of Omaha a lot, right? So they grab that flyer and I'll say, look, this is real important. Now let's just assume that they don't have the flyer. So say a lot of these mail or insurance by mail programs, they're a 5-year renewable term. And what that means is right now you're 62, they're going to give you this rate and it starts off really reasonable, but in 5 years you got to renew. So now you're 67 and now the rate just went up. And I show them the rate chart. And by the way, I have a copy of one of their rate charts that I laminated and I have it in my folder. I keep it on my clipboard. So I can show them. I don't just pull it out with everybody, but if they want proof or they don't have it, I'll pull it out and show it to them, right? And I'll show them the rates. So in 5 years, when it goes up, you're going to pay this much. And then at 72, you're going to pay this much. So those are increasing premiums, right? This program, I reiterate, once you apply for coverage, your rate's locked in. It's never going to increase. They like that. The second part, the second guarantee is that your death benefit never decreases. Now, Mr. Customer, I don't see this very often, but sometimes I see this where they don't have an increasing rate, they have a decreasing death benefit. And that doesn't make any sense to me because why start off, let's say at 20 or 30,000, and as you get older, it gets lower. See, because the cost of funeral is going up with inflation, not lower. Normally where I see this, I don't talk about this unless they've already identified that they're retired from a government agency, mainly a state agency is usually where I see it. Most state retirees, part of their retirement package is a decreasing death benefit, right? So if I've identified that, then I'll validate that with them and ask them to get it. Now, it doesn't mean it's 100%, just depends on their position when they retired. Obviously, the higher ranking people they got better benefits than the lower ranking people, right? But I would say probably 80–90% of the people I talk to that retired from the state, they have a decreasing death benefit, right? So you can talk about that. Number 3, the death benefit's guaranteed to be income tax free to your family. This is really important because you mentioned earlier, that your daughter, Emily, is your beneficiary. And when she gets those proceeds, not a single penny goes to the IRS. She gets to keep 100% to help cover those costs. Great. Number 4, this is really, really important. Guaranteed never to be canceled due to any changes to your age or your health, unlike other plans. And then I revert back to AARP or whoever they have on their table, right? And I show them, say, look, even if you're able to keep up with those increasing premiums, guess what happens on your 80th birthday? Happy birthday, you're no longer covered. Your policy's canceled because it only covers you up to age 79. And I just stay quiet. And they usually ask, well, what happens to all of that money? I said, it's gone. You lose it. There's no cash value there. It's expired. They get mad, and I let them get mad, right? Sometimes I'll point out, say, isn't it kind of funny that your life expectancy is 81, 82, whatever the number was, but they're going to stop covering you at age 80 right before your life expectancy is about to expire? Don't you think that's kind of funny? And I let them get mad, right? And I say, we don't do that. Our program, the policy never expires. As a matter of fact, if you want to live to 121, go on and do it because your policy is not going to expire. Number 5, guaranteed cash value that accumulates over time. This can be used for emergencies and other financial needs. Now, here's what I can tell you about that. a lot of people understand that if they take the money out, that it lowers their death benefit. So just validate it for them. So look, Mr. Customer, this takes time to accumulate. And I want you to know it's there if you ever need an emergency, but you don't want to just dip into it, for fun, because what happens is if you were to borrow 1,000 as an example, and you had a $10,000 policy, when you pass away, there's only 9,000 payable to your beneficiary. So it's there if you absolutely need it for an emergency, but you don't want to just keep dipping into it. And they love the fact that I cover that with them. And then I'll say, now the best part about this program is that there's no medical exams. That's why I'm here, to ask you those health questions to help determine, which program is going to be the best fit for you. And so we're not going to ask you to pee in a cup or do blood or urine, none of that stuff. And then we just move on, right? So once I covered this, the next page is this page. I think it's important. I never leave this out. I know a lot of people like to skip it, and this might be the reason why you're not closing as high as 80%. But you got to understand, like, these people are thinking about going to a funeral home and getting a prepaid plan. They haven't done it yet, or maybe they have checked into it, right? But that might be what's holding them up. When you ask them to buy and they say, I want to think it over, this might be what they're wanting to think about. They're just not telling you, right? So you got to cover it right up front. Remove all those possible objections, right? So I go over it. So, Mr. Customer, these are the three choices that you have when it comes to making decisions for final expense, right? The first one is to do nothing. You know what? You told me earlier that you don't have anything in place, and this is where you're at right now. And I think you would agree that this is not the best option. That's why you mailed that card in, because simply if you don't do anything, then really what you're doing is you're passing that financial burden on to your daughter, and she's going to have to figure out how to do it. And I get them to agree that that's not a good option. Option number two is you can acquire a prepaid funeral plan. You can go to any funeral home and meet with the funeral director. They're going to go ahead and they're going to talk about pre-need. By the way, pre-need prices are a little bit higher, right? And they're going to show you what your options are. They usually have packages put together. Most packages are about $15,000 for a burial, but let's just say you had a $10,000 package, right? Then what they're going to do is they're going to lock you in on that price, and they're going to say, doesn't matter how long you live, you're locked in. You don't have to pay any more. And that sounds good up front, but this is the truth of it. Number one, they want you to pay that off within 5 to 7 years. And so that usually puts your payments over $200 a month. That's the first problem. And most people say, oh, no, I can't afford that, right? And then I'll go on. Now, here's the other problem, is that it's kind of like layaway. So if you died unexpectedly, let's say you died in the first year or two, guess what? You hardly paid any principal off. So the balance becomes immediately due to your family. Because of this, guess what they do at the funeral home? They go ahead and sell you a life insurance policy on top of this to cover you in the event that you died before it was paid off. So now you're adding even more expense. The third one is to acquire a final expense plan. And what we're talking about here, Mr. Customer, is a whole life insurance policy with all those features and guarantees we just talked about. And see, with this, the cost is much less than that $200 a month. Plus, the beauty of this is that when you pass away, those proceeds, they go to your daughter, not the funeral home. And if there's any money left over, she's able to keep that for herself and help with some other expenses. So of these three options, which one makes the most sense for you? Guys, I've never had anybody say number two, not ever. They always say number three. Always. I'm telling you, if you set it up right, they're going to say number three. So that's what's important, right? So then from here, we're going to go into health questions. Whoops. Let me go back. There we go. We're going to go into the health questions. And so on the health questions, you can, if you're very, very brand new, you can go ahead and pull out the application and just start asking verbatim the health questions. And that's how I started. So there's nothing wrong with that. But after you've been doing this a while, you kind of already know what they're looking for, right? So this is typically these are the questions that I ask. First, I'll ask, so Mr. Customer, have you used any tobacco or nicotine products within the last 12 months? And I write all these answers on the lead, right? So I make my notes on the lead. So I usually put either NT for non-tobacco, or I just put TOB for tobacco, right? Then the next question, I start with the heart. Have you had any heart issues? I don't put a time frame. I just want to know, have you ever had any heart issues? I talk about heart attacks, strokes. Have they had any procedures, irregular heart rhythms, right? So you just start naming some of the stuff. Are you taking any medication for the heart, right? So there's lots of different ways to ask that question. I usually ask a bunch of questions about the heart. And then let's just say it's no. Okay, great. Do you have any history of diabetes? If they say yes, you need to dig in, right? So the questions are from there, when were you diagnosed with diabetes, right? Write the age or how long ago it was, right? Are you on insulin? Have you ever had insulin? Make the notation. Is it under control? Make the notation, right? Do you have any complications associated with diabetes, like neuropathy, right? So then ask those questions. And then I always ask, do you take gabapentin? Because a lot of people say, no, I don't have neuropathy, but then they take gabapentin, which is for neuropathy, right? So you got to take that down. Gabapentin could also be used for other things. So it doesn't necessarily mean neuropathy. So if you have somebody that's not diabetic and they take gabapentin, it's for something else, right? But if they're diabetic with gabapentin, the insurance company is going to assume that they have neuropathy, right? Any respiratory issues? Do they have COPD, right? Find out. If they do, make a note. You might want to ask, do you use any inhalers, right? So a lot of times people will say no to COPD, and then they say, yeah, I have an inhaler. So then you want to get that inhaler, make a note of it, right? Do you have any issues with your liver or your kidney? Do they have cirrhosis? Do they have, chronic kidney disorder, or worse yet, end-stage renal disease? So you want to find that out. How about cancer history, right? Find out about their cancer history, or HIV. Any mental health issues, right? Could be bipolar, schizophrenia. It could be dementia, Alzheimer's. So you need to find out about that, right? I usually joke with them, you don't have dementia, right? Or at least you don't remember, right? And they usually laugh, right? Okay. And then lastly, ask, what medications are you taking? Normally what most people will do is they'll either bring me a list or they'll bring me their little cooler that they have all their meds in, right? And that makes it easy for me because now I'm making a list of their meds and I'm Googling it. Guys, this is where you want to spend a lot of time on field underwriting. You want to get it right up front. What you don't want to do is submit an application and then have it come back declined because you did a poor job up front. And then now you're all desperate trying to find another solution. And obviously, whatever solution you're going to find is going to cost them more, right? Because they have some kind of medication or some kind of disease. So do a good job at asking questions up front, right? So you want to find out about it. I Google the meds. So there's two things you want to do. You want to find out what meds they're taking and what is it used for? What do you take this for? That's probably the most important thing is. So is this used for heart? Is this used for, pancreas? What is this used for? Make a note of that. There's a lot of meds that have multiple applications. So you want to kind of narrow that down, right? So once you've done all of that, you're like, Jimmy, I'm brand new. I don't know how to do this, right? Well, then you go to the cheat sheet, right? That's the way you do it. So this is the cheat sheet that I like to use. You can find this on the Senior Solution website. There's another one that's more comprehensive. It says Senior Solutions cheat sheet. This one says YIG cheat sheet. I like this because it's a one-pager and I can quickly determine what direction I'm going to go, right? So regardless of what carrier you're going to go with, the next step is to make a recommendation, all right? So in this case, let's assume that we're going to go with Transamerica. So I'm going to say, based on your health, the best company for you is Transamerica, and I'm going to pull out the brochure for that company that I'm recommending. So I keep brochures for everybody, right? So show them the brochure for the right carrier and tell them why you're making that recommendation. Mr. Customer, the reason why Transamerica is going to be the best is because you told me that you were diagnosed with diabetes at an earlier age. You started at age 40 as an example. You know, with Mutual of Omaha, because you're diagnosed at age 40, they're going to put you on a 2-year wait. And what that means is if you died in those first 2 years, they're not going to pay Emily. They're not going to pay your beneficiary. They're just going to refund the premiums to her. But Transamerica, and I open up the brochure and I circle it, gives you immediate coverage. And it says right here, full amount on day one. So I make that a really, really big deal, right? The next thing I like to do is I talk about the accelerated death benefit rider. So this is where I talk about it and I go to it and I say, now look, included at no additional cost, you get these 2 extra riders. This first one is in the future, if you're ever terminally diagnosed, right, meaning you have less than 12 months to live, you can actually file a claim while you're still alive. And that death benefit amount is going to go to take care of you so you can make your final arrangements yourself or put your affairs in order yourself. They like that. The second one is the nursing home rider. You know what? Right now you're nice and healthy, everything's good, but in the future, if you're ever placed into a nursing home, when the doctor gives you that diagnosis, you can also file the claim at that point. And they do this because they want you to put your affairs in order. They were trying to protect you, the client. They don't want the funeral home to have you sign over the policy to them. And I make a big deal about it. They really love it, right? So I give that brochure to them, and then I tell them to look through it while I calculate the rate for them, right? So that's the next step. I go to the 3-option quote sheet, and then this is, again, there's 2 different quote sheets that are on the Senior Solution website. This is the one that I like to use because it's a 1-pager, okay? In addition to this, I print on the bottom my name and my cell phone number, right? So in case I don't close it, at least I'm giving them a quote and they can call me back. Here's what's funny about B-backs. Most of the B-backs that I've ever wrote was because they initiated the call to me. It's very, very rare because I initiated the call to them. So those people that say they're going to think it over, get back to us, we'll probably do this next week, those deals never work out. I stopped wasting my time on those folks long time ago. I just move on, use my energy and my focus on new sales, new prospects. But every now and then somebody will call me back. They initiated the call. I'll go back out there and write them up, right? And they did it off of this quote sheet. So let me talk about how I do this. Option number 1, I go with what's the maximum amount of coverage that they can apply for. So assuming that it's 30,000, you know, Transamerica, I'm going to put 30,000 on the natural passing, and then I'm always going to include the accidental death benefit. So I'm going to put that 60,000. And then I just put a check mark. I don't put a dollar amount on nursing home and terminal illness, just check, right? Then I go to option number 2. This is a little different than Joe, but this is the way I do it. I go, what's the amount that they need to cover them today? So maybe that's 10,000, right? So that's today's cost. Check on those bottom 2. And then option number 3, that's going to be something in the middle. So obviously 10,000 and 30, the middle's 20. Boom, I put that there, right? So then I go over it with them. This is option number 1. This is option number 2. This is option number 3. These are the prices. And simply put, I say, which one makes the most sense for you? And just be quiet and let them decide. Okay. Almost all the time, I'm going to say the majority of the time, they're going to pick option number 3, which is the one in the middle. That's usually where people pick, right? Sometimes they don't pick that. Sometimes they pick the maximum. Sometimes they pick the minimum. Sometimes they ask, is there something in between here? What's 15 look like? I love that. They're engaged, right? That, you know, so you just recalculate it, right? I want to go with the scenario that they pick the 10,000. Let's say they pick the least one, right? Whenever they pick the least, it's really, really important that you make sure that it's still within their comfort range, because they might be picking that because it's the lowest option, but it might be a stretch for them. So I'll say, Mr. Customer, I just want to make sure that this is comfortable for you, because the last thing I want to do is put you in a bind. I don't want to take money off your table, or food off your table. The worst thing that can happen is that you stretch for this and you make a few payments and then you can't keep it and you let it go. And then you just wasted your money. And I don't want that to happen to you. Is this comfortable? And if they kind of hesitate, it's not, right? So say, you know what, we can scale this back. Let's look at 9 or 8 or 7, and let's scale this back. If you need to really, really scale it back, let's say we scale it back to 5 and they want a traditional burial. Now I can revert back to the story that I told them about Mr. Palomo and the casket. I'm going to say, look, what's important here is that you get something in place, because having something is better than nothing. Worst case scenario, you're able to, put 5,000 there, and then we can help your daughter figure out to go get that casket direct with somebody else, or we can come up with a solution to save money, just like Mr. Palomo. Oh, okay. So see, they just want reassurance that the option that they're picking is going to make a difference. Because how many times have you heard this? Oh, I don't want 5,000. It's not going to do nothing. And it's like they gave up. They're a quitter, right? You need to give them some hope and show them that it is a viable solution, and gives them some reassurance so that they can move forward. And guys, that's how I do it. I very, very rarely get any objections. I'm going to be honest with you. On the occasion that I do, then that's a whole nother topic, how to overcome objections. But I tell you, if you do this, your closing ratio is going to go up. So we recorded this call. We'll put it on the website for further review, and you guys can go back in and re-listen to it. If you missed a note, maybe redo it. But that is how to dissect the cell and do a great presentation. I want to go ahead and talk about next week. Again, we are not going to have a call next week. And oops, I think, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I messed up the call. We're not going to be on next week. Everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving. Don't forget that Christmas is not in any way going to detour your business. Year after year, it's always been my busiest month. Get out there and start selling. And let me tell you something, between now and Christmas, let's say you meet with somebody next week on Tuesday or something like that, and they say, you know what, I don't want to start this next month because it's Christmas. Start it in January. Don't miss the sell. Don't set up a be back. Start the policy, the payment in January. Just don't date the application, right? So like, let's just say they want to set it up for January the 5th, right? Or January the 10th. Date it December 5th or December 10th accordingly, and submit the app. And that way it will be within 30 days. And then you guys will have some Christmas money, right? So set that first payment up for January, and you're all good. And what's really cool about this is a lot of these families, you can sell it as, you know what, why not put a gift that's going to be more, forgotten about in 30 days, and you can put something in place, give this to your daughter, give this to your grandchild, so that, in the future, they have something really, valuable there. What's better than giving them a $10,000, $20,000 gift at Christmas time? And so guys, without further ado, y'all go out, have a great weekend. Happy Thanksgiving and good selling. If you have any questions, reach out to Joe or myself. Take care.